So I'm doing something and something in something is my talk. Logging and metrics in .NET Core. I am lead engineer at a company called Mago. We are the digital arm for Manchester Airport Group. You can find me on Twitter. I do have a blog. It's mostly rants, just saying, don't complain, you were warned. So logging and metrics is something that used to be quite commonplace because you could just provide a massive library at your code base, a new relic or that kind of stuff at your code base and get loads of nice little pretty graphs. In .NET Core things have changed a little bit because we're going cross-platform, that kind of stuff. So a lot of the problem I find is definitions between logging and metrics. They are two different things. They are subtly different. They do different things. So first of all, I wanted to do a bit of a definition around what they are, just give you a bit of context around it. The best one I could find was on the Business Dictionary of all places. But I think that kind of gives you an idea of where metrics come from. They're business related generally, and that's where they come from. The idea is that they're referencing something like a KPI. They're something that you measure. They're an indicator of something, and a lot of that could just come from business. But what you can also see there is they're things that you are deliberately planning to monitor. They're deliberate by definition. So what sort of things are metrics? Now, metrics themselves are numbers based. They are all numbers. They're not the logging, which we'll come to in a minute, which are text based. They're all about numbers. They're also about time series. They're about a number over time. They're about the idea that you've got a number of hits over a particular time period. They're also optimized for aggregation. So they're optimized for doing things over an hour, doing things over a day, aggregating them together. Because they're numbers, they are easy to do that way. So, I mean, those are the examples down the right there are the examples that you would probably have seen, I would hope, majority of people have seen. So hits per second, all of those are per something. That's what we're talking about there. They are per time period. So they are time-based by definition as well. So there's a few technologies out there that are purely based around metrics. Now, none of these are anything to do with logs, and that's the most commonplace thing is logs. Metrics I'm not seeing as much in all the industries I've worked in. I've not seen that to be as commonplace. So there's a few technologies that are pure time series databases. Now, none of these are graphing tools. They don't provide you with nice funky dashboards or anything like that. That's what you do with Grafana. These are just databases. Now, they're optimized for time series. They're optimized for something over time. So Prometheus, so InfluxDB, start with that one. That is a company that went commercial, sold out recently. But they offer quite a few different things around their solution. So they do. So generally these three are all pull-based, push-based mechanisms. So you have to push data into them. Prometheus is the differentiator here. So Prometheus is a scrape or a pull, which is why it's really widespread in things like Kubernetes and that kind of stuff. Because service discovery is a big thing when you're talking about microservices, that kind of stuff. So it goes out and finds these things, drags in all those metrics. So it is the differentiator in that. But all of those, Grafana is the common element. So Grafana is what gives you your nice funky graphs that you can use. None of those, well, I lie. You can do some graphing in them. It's not pretty, but you can do some graphing when you're debugging. So what's new in .NET Core? Now, as I alluded to, previously you had these things. Lots and lots of performance counters that were really ingrained into the ASP.NET ecosystem that because they're defined by Microsoft, you could literally just say, new relic, what does my system look like? And you would get some nice funky graphs for very, very little effort. They wouldn't tell you anything most of the time, but they looked cool. So that now doesn't exist in the whole .NET Core world. Performance counters just don't exist anymore. There are some replacements, so they are looking at event counters. They are new, not really defined yet. There's nobody really actually providing anything on top of them, but they are there. And I expect they are going to be the future, but they're just not as widespread at the moment. So there's a couple of open source libraries that sort of stepped into to help here. AppMetrics is by far the most widespread. It also integrates with all of the ones that I mentioned before. I should mention that literally doing research today on the tram, I found that there's another time series database called Timescale, which is looking quite interesting, which is just built on top of Postgres, which is looking pretty cool. Metrics.net seems to have died a death, but I've not really found anything that's providing that sort of integration. Now we're going to focus on AppMetrics. AppMetrics is the one that I've used quite a lot. It's really easy to use, which is why I like it. It's very light touch with what you're doing. It's incredibly easy plumbing. You'll recognize that sort of syntax for the app builders. With all the dependency injection built into .NET Core now, doing something like the bringing in iMetrics, very, very commonplace now, and do stuff, just wrap it in a using statement, and it will give you your measure. Now the system itself will then do all of the stuff with pushing to, in this case, it'll report to the InfluxDB, and we'll do a push on a schedule, normally every sort of 60 seconds. All of that completely configurable, which is becoming more and more commonplace, thankfully, in the .NET world. Is literally everything is becoming configurable via some mechanism, whether that's extensions or extension points, or whether it's just configuration things. So the other thing about AppMetrics and Grafana itself is that Grafana Labs has a little interface you can use for downloading dashboards. So if you want that New Relic thing, you know, where you want some graphs, you don't care what they do, you just want to throw them up so your boss thinks you're actually doing something, then AppMetrics does it. So literally one call into your app builder, and it will add some middleware across MVC, providing you with vaguely useful stats around throughputs and error rates, that kind of stuff. I personally don't find them useful at all, but sometimes you need to appease management by making it look like you've got some funky graphs. And they like pie charts. They mean nothing, but they like pie charts. So let's write some code. Now, for this demo, I'm not running a lot of things locally. I'm not going to run things like InfluxDB in the cloud. I have just created a little Docker Compose script. I advise, if you're going to be playing around with these things, it is incredibly useful just to have Docker running on your machine, so you can just fire up a container that has it on without installing anything. So you can literally do something like that if it works. Yes! Now, I'm going to do this as live as possible. I do have some snippets. Yeah, that is cheating, I know. But I'll get this done, and then you can, I'll zoom in so people at the back can see. Now, what I would advise as well is always run it in interactive mode, because you know, you've got loads of text going up and down, so it makes you look like a real programmer. So for those that can't see that, I don't know how to really zoom in on PowerShell, but .NET New MVC. We're just starting with a basic MVC site. There is no magic here. Nothing up my sleeves, as you can tell. I am on the Wi-Fi, so. So, basic MVC site, and now we will zoom in. Okay. We'll see if it restores them. Okay, so I would hope that a lot of people here have seen this before. This is called C#. Yeah? So as I was saying before, it is in...
Of course.
Yeah, I saw that before, and I thought, should I update just before my presentation?
Oh yeah, go for it. What could possibly go wrong?
Yeah.
Update during the presentation.
Okay, so if my snippets work, so you can do all this by you can do this via .NET Add if you want to, but that's what we're adding. So AppMetrics, the ASP.get core add-on, the MVC add-on, the reporting add-on, and that's what keys into the MVC pipelines to allow it to publish things out using background tasks. And then the InfluxDB reporter, which is what's going to push it onto our InfluxDB instance. And hopefully we should, yeah, there we go. dare I say things are going relatively smoothly. And now what should happen, at metrics, whoop. Okay, that is all the setup you need to do. It's very, very hard, really tricky, and I hope everybody is wearing goggles while doing it. I am actually tabs over spaces, but it's, yeah, I was playing with the editor configs and I couldn't get it to work in there. So that is pretty much it. So now, what we will do is we will add our management dashboards. Not useful ones, just management ones. Where are we? Use all metrics middleware. There we go. And that is going to provide us with some stats. And I've just realised that I've got a keyboard in front of me, and I'm reaching over it to.
I'm leaning on the keyboard at the same time.
There we go. I'm really bad at writing on a normal keyboard, on a laptop keyboard. Okay. Fingers crossed. Whee! Right. Let's just click around, get some data. Okay, so what we're now going to do is look at Grafana. Now, I've not looked at Influx. Influx doesn't really do anything. It's a database. So we're not going to look at Influx. What? Right, okay, so Grafana, it's black. That means it's a proper developer tool. So Grafana itself has no databases. It doesn't do anything. It stores some configuration for some dashboards. It really doesn't do anything at all. It just does some graphs, which arguably are the pretty part. So what we need to do is we need to connect Grafana into a data source. So I'm going to connect it into Influx. And we're going to use, because this is on a Docker network, we can do that. And the database should be my metrics. Spent ages coming up with that name last night. That's what 90% of my prep was. So we've got our data source. And now what we're going to do is we're going to add our funky dashboard from Grafana Labs. Which is 2125. That's not magic. I just know that it's 2125 because I've done this presentation a few times. So, but there is, if I go Grafana Labs dashboards, there is an entire website with dashboards for app metrics, for Docker containers, for Prometheus. People have built all these dashboards for you. So if you're using all the metrics, name the right things, like app metrics, use the all metrics middleware, you can just say, use that dashboard. So import that dashboard. Woohoo! Funky graphs. I was looking for an applause. No? No? All right.
Oh,
Yeah. Look, funky graphs. Funky graphs.
Well, we're not management people. We were looking at the numbers.
So you can see, hit those on. Now, some of the things you'll notice here, when you look at that throughput, for instance, this is specific metrics-based stuff called reservoir sampling that allows it to tail off. It doesn't just cull itself, it does a tail off. So a lot of this is around, and it becomes back to what we were saying before about being deliberate about what you want to monitor. So you need to know what it is you're looking to get out when you're talking about these kind of metrics. You really need to think, do I want to monitor that particular call to that third party? Do I need to know the calls? Do I need to know the response times? Am I looking for percentiles? Do I just need to know what the last response time was? You've really got to be deliberate about what you're actually thinking about now. Not just, oh, I'll just install New Relic and give them my first pawn, because that's how much it costs. Okay, so very quick one to add to the end of here. In my home controller, add a quick action on the end there. And I'm going to add some options for the counter. So it allows us to name the counter. I will put this code up on GitHub and stuff, by the way, so don't bother trying to take pictures. And as I said before, because of all the injection stuff that Microsoft have done and becomes very, very commonplace now, you can literally not put that in your index controller because that would be stupid. What you should do is create a constructor. Simple as that. And now you notice that one isn't a using statement because we're not monitoring something with a time period here. We just want to increment something. So, in theory, that should just run. And we should just be able to go to if I type it right. Woohoo! And let's just okay. So we should now have some data in there. Now, just get rid of that dashboard. What we're going to provide just a single stat that we're going to add on top of our InfluxDB source. Should see a list on here. We've got our home counter, which is the one that we just created as a metric. We don't want the average. We just want the sum. For those at the back, we just want the sum. So home counter, sum. Interval is a inbuilt thing inside Grafana. So we've now got that. And just because everybody loves graphs, we'll add a spark line on there. There's a full height one. It should. There are some cool controls, so you make it a gauge, which again is like a pie chart. It means nothing, but management types love them. Why that is not working, I don't know. But normally you get a little spark line across the bottom of that. So that is essentially now just incrementing over. So you imagine that in a service layer responding to a third-party call. So we have an API, numerous API endpoints that we call. We map each one of those. Now, one of the interesting things that you'll notice on there is if I add tag equals .NET North, because, you know, on brand, what you should see now is if I drop into here, and we look at our metrics, what you can do is you can filter by our user tag value of .NET North. Now, if you imagine that in a generalized API circumstance, now, if you've got an API endpoint that is a third-party service, you may want to actually monitor all of the calls that go over to there, but also want to slice that by different particular metrics that are in there. Maybe it's the endpoint. You want us to say, well, this particular endpoint is the one I want to monitor, and I want to monitor all of them at the same time. You can do it for all of them. You can do it for a subset. You can use, it's very easy syntax. There is a SQL syntax on top of that you can use if you want to use it directly, but as you can see, the interface there is not exactly complicated. If you can write the code, you can configure that, seriously. So metrics, numbers, numbers, numbers. Graphs, graphs, graphs. That's what they are. Logging, completely different. So logging is all about being text-based. It's all about something human readable. Now, I'd say fairly recently, but I'm sure that there's some computer scientists from the 70s who'll say, no, this is a really old thing. Structured logging is become fairly new. So this is about also doing your human readable stuff, so providing some information, but also providing some structured data that goes with it that allows you to do some funky stuff in there. Now, a lot of people see logs and metrics as very, very similar things. With structured logging, they're becoming very, very close. So there is numbers in there that you can do filtering, that kind of stuff with. However, they're still not around aggregation. They're still not. It's all about raw data. There's a massive load of storage space required if you want to do these things over time. In terms of comparing that to metrics, metrics have consistent scale patterns that you can essentially store years worth of data for a fraction of the size of the logs. Now, logs themselves, really, really verbose. I'm sure people were at the talk that Dylan gave around the information states, and I can't remember, I couldn't find the slide around what the error logs and information logs are, where information logs is basically fill my hard drive up. And they're incredibly hard for you to actually do anything with, really. I actually hate logging. You may come across in this talk. But that's what they are. And those are the examples that things are. Somebody called this function with these parameters. Thanks a lot. That is not really useful information, especially when you're in a distributed system, especially where you've got 4,000 things happening at the same time. Yes, you can use things like trace identifiers and you can use things like X-ray and equivalent tools, but they're still not, the promise was there, but they don't really actually give it. The ecosystem is a lot bigger. So why that one is Serilog in the top left there, I don't know. It's some kind of like stitch, yeah.
Is it a fish hook?
I don't know, maybe something like that. Serilog is the one that we're going to talk about. Serilog is very, very widespread now. It's ingrained. It's pretty much as easy as the metric stuff to work on. You've got the big boys, so you've got Splunk, Logs.io, Datadog. If you really want to give away your firstborn, then go with those. You've got Log4Net. I'm presuming 99% of people here have heard of Log4Net, yeah? Nlog, if you're in the AWS world, you've got CloudWatch Logs. I'm sure that Microsoft do something in that cloud thing that they're playing with at the moment. But there's a massive ecosystem around logs because it's big business. There's loads of data there. People can charge a lot of money for it. People don't use them as much as they probably should. But yeah, there's big business in it. Now, Microsoft has done something really cool with their new versions. They've actually baked logging straight into the framework. So they created ILOGGER T, like a generic logger, like a generic t-shirt. But it's baked in. So when you're choosing your logging solution, you don't have to do it ahead of time now. Just do your logging. And then choose that solution that you want to do afterwards. Choose where you want to send that afterwards. You don't have to really think about that ahead of time because the framework is already there to do it. Now, if you just do it, and you'll just log it out to console. Like I said, always have console logging on. It makes me feel like a real programmer. But it's library agnostic, so you don't need to worry about it. And out of the box, we'll support structured logging as well, providing the provider on the other end supports it as well. The other reason this is really cool is framework authors. Now, what used to happen is there was quite a few ways of framework authors providing logging stuff. So extension functionality that you could catch some kind of method, the event that they fire and then log that into your system, all that kind of stuff. And there's other systems that they use with reflection to build, and it's just, there's quite a few different ways. This way, framework authors, just use iLogger, and then they'll piggyback on whatever you're bringing in, which is a really nice little feature that I think is vastly underestimated. Again, really easy plumbing. This time it's on the web host rather than on the application builder, which there are ways to do it through the application builder as well, but this is the default implementation that they do. There are advantages to doing it the other way, but I won't go through all those. In terms of very similar to the way that the iMetrics stuff works and the AppMetrics, when you want to do something to write to a different data source, it's just an extension fluent method like that. You can just say, write to Elasticsearch, write to my local file system, write to the console, write to Datadog, write to Nlog, write to Elmer. You can actually do as many as you want. If you really wanted to, you could send it off to 5 or 6 different sources. Personally, because I run in AWS, we use our own Elasticsearch instance. We also use CloudWatch logs, but we also throw errors specifically filtered through Serilog straight over to Raygun, which does a load of error analysis, does trending, that kind of stuff, and also does things into alerting systems as well. So the system allows you to configure all the different methods, so the warning, information, debug, and you can tell it which sources to send to each of those. Let's write some code. You may remember this solution from such presentations as logging and metrics in .NET. Okay, app builder, or the web host builder. Similar thing, just like that. We need some things to come in for Serilog. Now this is the point where my presentation died last time because I'd missed some things off. But you can see we're bringing in Serilog. We're bringing in the ASP.NET Core add-on, so that's what hooks into the MVC pipelines. You've got the settings configuration, which allows us to do some of the stuff where it pulls it from config files. We're also bringing in console logging and Elasticsearch. Now, syncs is what Serilog call their outputs. So there are, I'd say, about 100 of them, but any service that ingests logs, there is probably a sync for it, whether that's Datadog, whether that's Logs.io, and the configuration is incredibly simple. And that is your setup. Really complicated again. Now you'll notice that the login up there, that was the inbuilt one, the inbuilt console login. You'll notice subtly different. So we've got subtly different data, subtly different login. But that's the inbuilt console login, so that's overtaken the .NET, the standard ASP.NET Core stuff. Now, one of the interesting things that you can see there, you can already see some of the logging coming out. So that's it, the app metric stuff pushing over to Influx. Now, if I go over here, let's do some refreshing on that. Go to the home page. You can see all that logging's going out there, which is vaguely cool, I suppose. However, what we can then do, because of the way that we're running this, is drop in Elasticsearch as our sync. Ignore the formatting. No, I can't. I can't do it. And that's too far indented as well. Sorry, I couldn't leave it. It's
Right.
although all of those of you who don't understand why I did that, you're not real programmers. Just saying. Right. So, where was I? So we've got that in there now. Now you shouldn't see any difference here, because all we've done is said log it to the console, but also send it over to Elasticsearch as well. So I've got an Elasticsearch instance running. Elasticsearch, again, is a data store. It's a document data store. It doesn't do graphing. However, there is a tool that you can use. And in this day and age, I would imagine that most of you have heard of it, which is I think that's the one, maybe, or is it 5601? Hey, that's the one. Now, depending on where you come from, it's either Cabana or Cabana. Apparently, it denotes your lineage. Yeah. So what you'll find is it's created an index for us. There's a few setup tasks. I'm not really going to go through all of this and explain it. I'm just going to type stuff and hope I type it right. Boom. And then we can go in here and you can see that's the logs that were created there. Let's just drop some more logs in there. And hopefully, no. There you go. All those logs are going in there. So what you see in the console is now in there. Now, what's really important, and this is where structured logging comes in, is what you'll see here is all of these fields have been dragged out as individual items. They're not just, it went to this page and it took this amount of time. Now you will find that. So down at the bottom there, you can see that is the actual log message. So log message is there, but what it's also got is all of the important bits separated out, and that's where structured logging comes in. Because what you can now do is you can say, actually, I want to filter by that particular value. So you can really start interrogating your logs. Now, if you are using logging, always use structured logging. It is vitally important nowadays, because otherwise you're just throwing data on a disk and not looking at it. You're not actually using that data. Or if there's anyone Americans, data. Okay. Now, again, throwing this into our code, there is some plumbing you can do. So that is what it's pulled in. It's not pulled in Serilog. It's not pulled in anything like that. It's literally just pulled in a Microsoft library that's inbuilt in the framework. Using the classes allows some further control in the loggers, so you can say particular libraries, source context, that kind of stuff, and you can do all of that filtering in your configuration. All of that as well you can do from your app settings config. Just like that. And then you've got all of the methods that, if you've ever done any logging, you would recognize: critical, debug, error, trace, warning, etc., etc. But for me, add that in there. And then if we go through Discover, remove that. And now I've got to remember exactly how it comes out. Well, here's where throwing things in becomes interesting, because now what we can do is, there we go, really, really fast logging and searching through those logs. Now what you can also do then is you can add some visualizations. Because we've got that structured logging in there, now we can actually provide some real analysis on the top of it. So we can add a data table against that index. Already 362 logs. We can then split the rows by, if we use terms of, where's the source context? That one there. Grouping it by those different logs. Now, I actually don't like using Elasticsearch for running these logs. It can provide some interesting graphing functionality off the top of it, but the reality is, unless you know what you're looking for, it's not really that useful. If you're using it for errors and that kind of stuff, I would absolutely advocate for you looking at a tool like Raygun, Rollbar, Stackify, those kind of things, because they provide heuristics on top of these logs. They'll look at the stack traces, look for things that match together and reduce all of that noise. This is more about going back through and doing some more investigation. But it is useful to do stuff like that. Now, I said there is the promise of structured logging. Now, this is the bit that I'm not sure is going to work, but so if we log some information out and we say increment was hit with tag and pass in tag. Now, most of you will say, that's just a string format, which it is. You're right. It's not really that great. So, tag was hit with nothing, but you see how it's coloured there. Now, that's telling me that that is actually a structured log now, because that is a value that will be pulled out in my logging. So if we go back through and look at our discover, when it eventually flushes, all right, I'm going to have to do lots on. Let's do tag equals .NET North.
Still filter not help.
Just testing everyone. Is nobody paying attention? Only this man. It's still not coming through. There we go. It is doing something, but not what I wanted. There we go. That's the one. So as you can see, that is now a field that's come through. Now, because it's Elasticsearch, you can provide templates that allow you to make that searchable. You can then make it into a raw field with a backing field, so you can do lots and lots of filtering, that kind of stuff. But you can see the message template, all that stuff all goes into the log in its raw format. And if you do more complex objects, you can pass in, I will do one more before I'm sure pizza will arrive. And if we add in request dot that one, remote IP address. Now I've passed in a complex object. I'm going to say that, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to put an at in front of it. There's a reason, not just because I want it to be awkward. So you can see now it's actually replaced that with the entire object. Now if you don't use the @ sign, that's just going to provide it with a toString on your object. So a toString on a remote IP object is just going to bring back, anybody? I thought this was real programmers here. You don't know what a toString on a remote IP address is? But you can see the difference. So what I've said is I want the entire object in there instead. Now, either way, either one of those, if you go into Grafana now, notice I'll switch to Grafana because that's proper posh. Three minutes? No. It'll be around there somewhere. Honest. There you go. So because I passed in that complex object, you can see it's provided all of that nested object there as fields that we can now filter on. I can't do it on these because we've not set these up in Elasticsearch under a template to say, I actually want these to not be free text, I want these to be numbers, I want these. So if you were passing in a number, then you'd be able to say, I want this to be a range, I want this to be a number, I want this to be a term, I want this to be filterable, I want this to be searchable as free text, for instance. All of those things are configurable inside the template. You can actually do it inside of Serilog. I'm not going to go into all that detail. But there you go. That is logging in a nutshell. As you can see, incredibly complicated. Do wear hard hats while implementing. But that was that. So I just want to finish off by something relatively new, as far as I'm concerned, in the logging and metric space, which is events. Now, this isn't event sourcing and all that kind of new funky stuff that the hipsters are doing now. It's something that comes under the observability banner. Observability is the big buzzword right now. It's a scientific term around how much can you see that's happening in your system at any given time. Now, events is something that takes logging and structured logging to another level. But again, it's like metrics in that it's deliberate. You really need to think about what you're doing. Honeycomb.io are incredibly good. I haven't played with them too much yet, but they are looking really, really promising. But they're about providing high cardinality data. So when you pass in that remote IP address, for instance, it's about keeping all of that context, not just what the IP address was, all of that context, allowing all of that to be incredibly fast filtering. But it's not about keeping your logs for 2 years, because it's about real-time debugging. It's about keeping these things for 2 or 3 days, and then providing you with really, really in-depth knowledge about what was happening at that particular time. It's all about tracing and lots of data. It's really, really exciting to me to look at, but I haven't had as much time to play with that. Maybe my next presentation might be around that, but I would advise everybody have a real look at that. If you're talking about real distributed systems, you're talking about high load, high performance, and you're on about really in-depth debugging of those remote systems, then really have a look at it. All right, well, thank you very much.
Thank you.